It all began on a quiet Tuesday morning. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped, and the faint hum of distant traffic filled the air. It was the kind of morning that made you want to sit on your porch with a cup of coffee and watch the world wake up. But for Ethan Carter, the tranquility was about to be shattered. Ethan was a man of routine. Every morning, he would wake up at 6:30 a.m., brew a pot of coffee, and head out to his garage to start his day. His garage was his sanctuary, a place where he tinkered with his car, worked on small DIY projects, and stored his tools. It was a space he had meticulously organized, and he took pride in keeping it clean and orderly. But that morning, as he stepped into his garage, he was met with an unexpected sight. Parked right in the middle of his space was a sleek, silver sedan. Ethan blinked, thinking he must be seeing things. He rubbed his eyes and looked again, but the car was still there, occupying his garage as if it belonged there. At first, Ethan thought it might be a mistake. Maybe someone had confused his house with another. It was an honest mistake, right? So he decided to handle it like any reasonable person would. He walked over to the house 2 doors down, where the car's owner, Lila Harper, lived. Lila was a woman in her late 30s, with a reputation for being difficult. She was known for her sharp tongue and her tendency to push boundaries. Ethan had never had much interaction with her, but he had heard enough from the neighbors to know that she wasn't the most considerate person. He knocked on her door, and after a few moments, it swung open. Lila stood there, dressed in a silk robe, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She looked at Ethan with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. "Hi," Ethan began, trying to keep his tone polite. "I think you might have parked in my garage by accident." Lila blinked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, without a hint of embarrassment, she replied, "Oh yes. My space is a bit tight, and yours is right in the middle. It's much easier to get in and out of." Ethan stared at her, waiting for her to realize how absurd that sounded. But she just stood there, her face impassive, as if she had just explained something perfectly logical. "Okay," Ethan said, taking a deep breath. "But this is my garage. I live here." Lila gave him a small smile and said, "Oh, right." Then, without another word, she closed the door in his face. Ethan stood there for a moment, stunned. He had never felt so disrespected in his life. He clenched his fists, trying to keep his anger in check. This wasn't just about the garage. It was about boundaries, respect, and common decency. And Lila Harper had just crossed a line. From that day on, Ethan's life became a daily battle. Every morning, without fail, Lila's car would be parked in his garage. It didn't matter how early he woke up or how late he stayed up, her car was always there, taunting him. Ethan tried everything he could think of to resolve the situation. He knocked on her door every morning, asking her to move her car. He even tried talking to her in a calm, rational manner, explaining how inconvenient it was for him to have his garage occupied. But Lila's response was always the same, a dismissive smile and a closed door. He went to the neighborhood association, hoping they could mediate the situation. But they just shrugged it off, saying it was a neighborly dispute that they couldn't get involved in. Ethan even tried talking to the other neighbors, hoping they would back him up. But most of them just avoided the issue, not wanting to get involved in the drama. Lila, on the other hand, seemed to take pleasure in Ethan's frustration. She would take her time moving her car, as if she were doing him a favor. And when she finally did move it, she would give him that same infuriating smile, as if to say, "What are you going to do about it?" Ethan was at his wit's end. He had tried being polite, he had tried being firm, and he had even tried ignoring the problem. But nothing worked. Lila was like a force of nature, unstoppable and unrelenting. One morning, Ethan had had enough. He woke up earlier than usual, determined to put an end to the madness. He moved his car as close to Lila's as possible, leaving only about 10 centimeters of space between them. Then, he went back inside, poured himself a cup of coffee, and waited. It didn't take long for Lila to realize what had happened. He heard her car door open and close, followed by the sound of her trying to squeeze into her car. But with so little space, she couldn't even open the door wide enough to get in. Ethan watched from his kitchen window as Lila walked around her car, huffing and puffing. She tried to maneuver her way in, but it was no use. Finally, after about half an hour, she gave up and rang his doorbell. "Can you move your car so I can get out?" she asked, her tone laced with irritation. Ethan could have moved his car. He could have ended the standoff right then and there. But something inside him snapped. He was tired of being pushed around, tired of being disrespected. So, he decided to play her game. I could, he said, feigning innocence. But I could also pretend I didn't hear you and enjoy my coffee in peace. Lila's face turned red with anger, but Ethan didn't care. He closed the door and went back to his coffee, a small smile playing on his lips. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of satisfaction. But his victory was short-lived. The next day, when he got home, Lila's car was back in his garage. She hadn't given up, and neither had he. Ethan knew he couldn't keep playing this game. He needed a better plan, one that would put an end to Lila's reign of terror once and for all. He spent hours brainstorming, trying to come up with a solution that would be both effective and legal. Finally, it hit him. If Lila wanted to treat his garage like her personal parking space, then he would treat her car like abandoned property. He picked up the phone and called a car removal service, pretending to be a concerned citizen. "Hi, there's an abandoned car in my garage," he said, trying to sound as convincing as possible. "It's been there for days, and I can't get in touch with the owner. Can you remove it?" The attendant asked him a few questions, and Ethan provided the necessary details. Then, he got the answer he was hoping for. "We can pick it up right now," the attendant said. "The standard destination would be an impound yard, but if you authorize it, we can take it straight to a partner junkyard." Ethan's heart raced. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He gave the go-ahead, and within minutes, a giant tow truck pulled into his driveway. The tow truck driver got out and looked at Lila's car, then at Ethan. "Is that the abandoned car?" he asked. "That's the one," Ethan replied, trying to keep a straight face. With practiced efficiency, the driver hooked up the cables and started to lift the car. Ethan watched from his balcony, a cup of coffee in hand, ready to enjoy the show. But then, the best part happened. Lila appeared at the end of the street, returning from who knows where. She froze when she saw the tow truck lifting her car, her face a mixture of shock and rage. "What are you doing?" "That's my car," she screamed, marching toward the tow truck driver. The driver didn't even flinch. "You're in the wrong garage, ma'am. The owner asked for it to be removed." Lila turned to Ethan, her eyes blazing with anger. "You can't do that." "Yes, I can," Ethan replied, smiling. "I did." Lila tried to call the police, but Ethan was prepared. He showed her an email he had sent to the neighborhood association, informing them that an unknown car was occupying his garage. The car was officially a trespasser, and the law was on his side. As the tow truck drove away with Lila's car, Ethan felt a sense of triumph. He had finally won. But the war wasn't over yet. The next day, Lila showed up at Ethan's door, demanding that he pay for her car. Ethan kept his cool, reminding her that she had been the one parking in his garage without permission. "If you sue me," he said, "then we'll have to go to court. And do you know what happens there? I can claim compensation for the months you occupied my garage without permission." Lila was speechless. For the first time, she realized that she had no leverage. She had played her hand, and she had lost. Over the next few weeks, Lila tried to save face, but the neighborhood had turned against her. She became a public joke, and eventually she decided to move away. Ethan watched as the moving truck pulled up to her house, a sense of satisfaction washing over him. He had stood his ground, and in the end, justice had been served. As he sat on his balcony, sipping his coffee, Ethan couldn't help but smile. The garage was finally his again, and he had learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, you have to fight fire with fire. With Lila gone, the neighborhood entered a new era of peace. Ethan's garage was once again his sanctuary, and he could finally enjoy his mornings without the stress of finding a strange car in his space. The neighbors joked about the garage wars, and Ethan laughed along with them. He had come out on top, not by shouting or fighting, but by standing his ground and letting Lila bury herself. As he watched the moving truck drive away, Ethan raised his coffee cup in a silent toast. Justice had been served, and he could finally move on with his life. Months had passed since Lila Harper had left the neighborhood, and life had returned to normal for Ethan Carter. His garage was once again his sanctuary, and the daily stress of finding a strange car in his space was a distant memory. The neighbors had moved on, and the garage wars had become a humorous anecdote shared at block parties. But just as Ethan began to relax, a new threat emerged. one that would test his patience and resolve in ways he never imagined. It started with a moving truck. Ethan was sitting on his balcony, enjoying his morning coffee, when he noticed the truck pulling up to Lila's old house. At first, he didn't think much of it. People moved in and out of the neighborhood all the time. But as he watched the new occupants unload their belongings, a sense of unease settled over him. The new neighbor was a man in his early 40s, with a rugged appearance and a no-nonsense attitude. His name was Marcus Kane, and he had a reputation for being a tough, no-nonsense kind of guy. Ethan had heard rumors about Marcus from the neighbors, stories about his time in the military, his short temper, and his tendency to hold grudges. Ethan tried to shake off his unease. After all, Marcus was just another neighbor. There was no reason to think he would cause any trouble. But as the days went by, Ethan began to notice small, unsettling changes. The first sign of trouble came one morning when Ethan stepped out to his garage and found Marcus standing there, inspecting the space with a critical eye. "Morning," Marcus said, his tone gruff. "Nice garage you've got here." Ethan forced a smile. "Thanks. It's my little sanctuary." Marcus nodded, but there was something in his expression that made Ethan uneasy. "Mind if I take a look around? I'm thinking of renovating my garage, and I could use some ideas." Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to be rude, but he also didn't like the idea of Marcus poking around his space. "Sure, I guess," he said reluctantly. Marcus spent the next few minutes walking around the garage, taking mental notes. Ethan watched him closely, trying to gauge his intentions. When Marcus finally left, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A few days later, Ethan woke up to find Marcus's truck parked in his driveway. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Maybe Marcus had parked there by accident. But when he went to confront him, Marcus just shrugged. "My garage is full," he said. "Figured you wouldn't mind if I parked here for a bit." Ethan's blood boiled. He had been through this before with Lila, and he wasn't about to let history repeat itself. "Actually, I do mind," he said, trying to keep his tone calm. "This is my driveway, and I need the space." Marcus's expression darkened. "Look, I'm not asking for much. Just a few days until I get my garage sorted out." Ethan clenched his fists, trying to keep his anger in check. "I'm sorry, but I can't have you parking here. It's my property." Marcus stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Fine, I'll move it." But the next day, Marcus's truck was back in Ethan's driveway. And the day after that. And the day after that. Ethan knew he couldn't let this continue. He had fought too hard to reclaim his garage, and he wasn't about to let Marcus take it away from him. He decided to take a stand. One morning, he parked his car directly behind Marcus's truck, blocking it in. Then, he went inside and waited. It didn't take long for Marcus to realize what had happened. He stormed over to Ethan's house, his face red with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Marcus demanded. Ethan stood his ground. "I'm protecting my property. You've been parking in my driveway without permission, and I'm not going to let you do it anymore." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You're making a big mistake, Carter." Ethan didn't back down. "No, Marcus. You're the one making a mistake. This is my property, and I'm not going to let you push me around." The two men stood there, locked in a tense standoff. Finally, Marcus turned and walked away, muttering under his breath. The conflict between Ethan and Marcus escalated over the next few weeks. Marcus continued to park in Ethan's driveway, and Ethan continued to block him in. The neighbors watched from a distance, unsure of who to side with. One night, Ethan woke up to the sound of glass breaking. He rushed to his window and saw Marcus standing in his driveway, a baseball bat in hand. Marcus had smashed the headlights of Ethan's car. Ethan's heart raced. He knew he had to do something, but he also knew that confronting Marcus directly would only make things worse. He decided to take a different approach. Ethan spent the next few days gathering evidence. He installed security cameras around his property, documenting every time Marcus parked in his driveway or damaged his car. He also reached out to the neighborhood association, providing them with the footage and explaining the situation. The association was hesitant to get involved at first, but when they saw the extent of Marcus's actions, they agreed to take action. They issued a formal warning to Marcus, stating that if he continued to harass Ethan, they would involve the authorities. Marcus was furious. He stormed over to Ethan's house, demanding that he remove the cameras and drop the complaint. "You're making a big mistake, Carter," Marcus said, his voice low and threatening. "You don't want to mess with me." Ethan stood his ground. "I'm not afraid of you, Marcus. This is my property, and I'm not going to let you bully me." Marcus stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked away. The tension between Ethan and Marcus came to a head one night when Marcus tried to force his way into Ethan's garage. Ethan had been expecting something like this, and he was ready. As Marcus tried to break down the door, Ethan called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived on the scene and arrested Marcus for trespassing and vandalism. The neighbors watched in shock as Marcus was led away in handcuffs. Ethan felt a sense of relief, but he also knew that this wasn't the end. Marcus was a dangerous man, and he wouldn't go down without a fight. In the weeks that followed, Marcus was charged with multiple offenses, including trespassing, vandalism, and harassment. He was sentenced to several months in jail, and a restraining order was issued to keep him away from Ethan and his property. With Marcus gone, the neighborhood once again returned to peace. Ethan's garage was safe, and he could finally relax. But he knew that he had been lucky. Marcus was a dangerous man, and things could have ended very differently. As he sat on his balcony, sipping his coffee, Ethan reflected on everything that had happened. He had stood his ground, and in the end, justice had been served. But he also knew that he couldn't let his guard down. The world was full of people like Lila and Marcus, and he would always need to be ready to defend what was his. With Marcus out of the picture, Ethan decided to make some changes. He installed a state-of-the-art security system, complete with motion sensors and surveillance cameras. He also reached out to the neighborhood association, proposing new rules to prevent similar conflicts in the future. The neighbors were supportive, and the new rules were quickly adopted. The neighborhood became a safer, more peaceful place, and Ethan felt a sense of pride in what he had accomplished. As he watched the sun rise over the horizon, Ethan raised his coffee cup in a silent toast. The garage wars were over, and a new chapter had begun. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.